Hello out there, everyone. This is Tamara Duker Freuman, and I'm streaming live for my first Facebook Live ever. Thank you so much for inviting me here, Build Up Dietitians team. I'm home now in Nyack, New York, quarantining, and it's so nice to connect with both of you. I hope everyone is staying healthy and safe. And I'm going to talk today a little bit about my professional journey from corporate burnt out marketer to the bloated belly whisperer. So I work in a gastroenterology practice. I've been there for about 10 years. And just in these past 10 years, I've kind of gone from knowing basically nothing about digestive health to having a national platform. I write for US News for the past 8 years now. I have a book called The Bloated Belly Whisperer, which hopefully you've seen around, and perhaps you're aware of the German version, the Bye Bye Blähbauch for our German speakers, or perhaps the traditional Chinese version, which I will be honest, I don't know what it's called, but it looks great. And so you can find me on Twitter at Tamara Duker, D-U-K-E-R, or on Facebook and Instagram at Bloated Belly Whisperer, and my website is www.thebloatedbellywhisperer.com. So we're going to get started. I'm going to tell you a little bit about my practice. Currently, I work in New York City for a gastroenterologist, and I've been with the same practice for the whole 10 years of my dietetics career. He is a specialty in sort of functional GI disorders, so a lot of irritable bowel syndrome, functional dyspepsia, motility problems, but we really see everything. We see inflammatory bowel diseases, bacterial overgrowth, lots of food intolerances, and all the fun stuff to talk about at dinner: gas, bloating, diarrhea, constipation. Come to my house, conversations very lively over the dinner table, no taboos. And so I've been there for 10 years, but I will tell you that when I walked into his office 10 years ago, I basically knew nothing about nothing. I knew for my grad school that I was interested in digestion and the GI tract, and wanted to really specialize in GI nutrition. And I think that interest was really sparked, I think, one day when I was completing the DPD, and there was this class. And the teacher just threw up this really rudimentary diagram about the GI tract. And it was just the stomach and the intestines. And it was almost like this roadmap. And I just had this idea, like this click that, oh my gosh, if you really understand the physiology of your GI tract, there's such a huge impact on nutrition, right? And so if you know that vitamin B12 is absorbed in the ileum, then you know that if someone has a problem in their ileum, that might affect their absorption of that nutrient. And if you kind of know what's happening along the way, it would really impact how somebody needed to be treated nutritionally. I just loved that one-to-one relationship between the digestive tract and food and nutrition, and I really wanted to kind of get involved in that field of dietetics. And so basically when I went back to school, I went through my dietetic internship at Mount Sinai Hospital, and it was very inpatient focused, which I learned a ton, but it wasn't really where I felt I wanted to be practicing. And so I had this elective rotation with the outpatient GI dietitian. She worked in the faculty practice, and I got to spend, I think, just one day with her, and I just completely fell in love with what she did, and the types of cases she was having, the types of interactions she was able to have with patients. And her name is Laura Manning. She's still out there. Maybe she's even with us today. Hi, Laura, if you're there. Thank you for being an amazing mentor. And I loved her job. I loved her life. And when I passed the RD exam, the first phone call I made practically was to Laura. And I was basically like, hey, Laura, remember me? I want to be you. How do I become you? Are there any other doctors that are hiring dietitians to do the kind of work that you do? And she actually said, yeah, there's this terrific doctor, Dr. Goldstein, shout out. Hey, Dr. Goldstein, I am working. I'll be back to work shortly. And maybe he would hire you. And so I reached out to this doctor on her recommendation, and he basically hired me on her recommendation. And at the time, I was fresh out of school, never worked a day of my life in dietetics. I was pregnant with twins. I had all this great textbook knowledge about nutrition and medical nutrition therapy, but I'd never actually worked with a patient. And I sat down with him and I asked him, so, Dr. Goldstein, like, what kind of cases do you see a lot of here in this practice? And I was, just trying to get myself up to speed. And he listed 5 conditions that I had literally never heard of. He said, oh, I see a lot of irritable bowel syndrome, IBS. That wasn't in my Krause's textbook. I don't remember that condition. And he mentioned bacterial overgrowth. Again, never heard of that before. He mentioned fructose intolerance. I'd heard of lactose intolerance, but not that one. And there was like 2 others. And I realized, wow, I have a master's degree in clinical nutrition and I'm joining this practice and I know nothing about anything that they do here. And so, I think I really realized I had to get up to speed pretty quickly and learn about all these outpatient GI conditions. And so I remember the first phone call I made was again to my mentor, and I basically kind of just met her for lunch one day and asked her to like do a brain dump, what are your approaches for managing these types of cases and these, and are there products that you rely on and what kind of diets work, and, kind of asked her to brain dump. And then I got online and I went into PubMed and I was researching a lot of these conditions to see if there was any kind of consensus papers or evidence-based practices for nutrition therapy for some of these conditions, and started making these little handouts for myself, which I honestly turned out to be more for me and my own confidence than for patients because I rarely even ever gave them out. And I just kind of started doing, I guess, some book research. But I have to say the real learning started when the patients started coming in and they just started talking about their symptoms. And I just realized how much a foundation in food and nutrition, just what we know about food and nutrition, if you use your kind of common sense and apply things logically, you can really help patients figure out a lot of stuff, even without necessarily being super familiar with their conditions. And obviously there's a learning curve, and I would learn from my patients. Someone living with IBS for 20 years can teach you a thing or two about managing IBS because they've tried everything and they know what works and they know what doesn't work, even if they didn't always know why, right? And they knew what would trigger their symptoms and what foods would feel good. And as you start to see a lot of these patients, you can kind of take a learning from one patient, apply it to another patient, and then kind of build your knowledge base. And so I kind of just started learning from my patients as I went. And I'll say that, one thing that I especially learned from my patients to develop my GI expertise was that there was this thing called bloating. And it was very early on in my GI practice that patients would come in and I'd say, so, what brings you here today? And they would say, oh, I'm so bloated. And I recall not knowing what that word meant, really. It's not a clinical term. It's not something that was ever in a book that I read about. And it really honestly wasn't even mentioned in the literature at the time, although now there's actually a lot of literature on bloating. And so I just had to ask, what do you mean by that? And as more and more patients came in complaining about bloating, it became very clear to me that they weren't all talking about the same thing. So some people would say the word bloating and they meant that literally their belly was like out to there after they ate and they looked pregnant. And some people would refer to bloating as just like this feeling, this like upper stomach feeling of discomfort, even if they didn't look very distended. And for some people, bloating was really like an upper GI dyspeptic kind of refluxy thing. And for some people, bloating was a very lower GI kind of gassy, poopy kind of thing. And starting to do a lot of pattern recognition when people would say bloated, and I would ask all these questions to really narrow down what they meant by it. And there's almost like this taxonomy of bloating in my head. When people use these words and describe these symptoms, they were referring to this particular experience, and these are the diet remedies that seem to work for them. And when they describe bloating in these terms with these symptoms, they meant this other thing. And I kind of it was this pattern recognition and kind of creating this organizing structure in my own brain. And I decided, at that time that, hey, this would be a great topic for an article to write for US News, which I just started writing for at the time. They found me because I had this really amateurish food blog that I started in grad school, which, back in, let's say, like 2008, I guess, was when I went back to school. Believe it or not, there weren't actually a lot of food blogs, and certainly not a lot of gluten-free food blogs because I have celiac disease. So I was writing just like a gluten-free food blog for my own creative outlet. And US News found me and asked me to write about that type of stuff. And so I just started writing for US News as a result of that. Nowadays, everyone has a food blog and a bazillion gluten-free food blogs. Not very exciting and not going to get you noticed. But at the time, it did because, back old-timey. So I decided, this taxonomy of bloating would be such a great topic for a US News article. And I just kind of threw it together, shot it off, didn't really think anything of it. And year after year, for literally the next 5 years, that article about bloating and the different types of bloating was the #1 viewed article on US News across usnews.com across all their verticals, which means across technology, science, politics, health, all of them. And after about 5 years of having that #1 most trafficked article, it became pretty clear that this is a topic that maybe a lot of people are really interested in, and there's not a lot of stuff written about it out there. And so maybe there's an opportunity to really kind of, what we would say in the business world, name it and claim it. Really kind of talk about bloating, be the go-to source about bloating, and really kind of own that niche professionally and I guess conceptually in a world that's really, really crowded and it's hard to stand out. And so the idea that maybe that article could form the basis of a book really dovetailed with what I was seeing with my patients, which is so many people were coming in with this complaint. And it was really tricky for them, right? Because bloating is a symptom, it's not a diagnosis. And so there's tons of books that people have written about managing specific conditions. If you have GERD, there's a million books about managing GERD, right? Acid reflux disease. If you have irritable bowel syndrome, there's a lot of books written about IBS. But if you have a symptom that you don't know what the corresponding diagnosis is, it's a lot harder to get tailored advice. And so the idea is, you know, could I write a book that would build on my expertise of seeing all these different types of bloating and help people sort out what was causing it and how to manage that, and this idea that it wasn't sort of like this one size fits all. And that was kind of the origins of how I fell into becoming an author, which is basically learning from your patients, identifying an unmet need or a niche, and then kind of really just going after that and giving it a name and helping people sort that out. And so that's kind of how I became the bloated belly whisperer, which is certainly not something I ever aspired to be as a young person growing up, but there that is. You know, and then over the years, you know, other ways I built my expertise is, you know, I did a lot of seminars. Like I remember kind of earlier in my career, fabulous colleague Kate Scarlatta and Patsy Katsos were kind of doing their rounds cross country, giving these seminars in hotels about the low FODMAP diet. I learned that maybe about 2 years into my practice. And that for me was like this huge unlock, learning about the low FODMAP diet, because I mean, I can't even imagine being a GI dietitian without that tool in my toolkit. But, you know, I stumbled along for a couple of years without it, almost to the point where I want to call up some of my patients I saw that first year and be like, oh God, I'm so sorry. Like, I have a better tool now. I think I could help you. I probably didn't help you so much back then, but I know much more now. And so building that, getting that tool in the toolkit was really, really helpful. And it was so great to kind of give some method to the madness of why all these IBS patients were telling me that onions and garlic always bothered them, and believing them and knowing that that was a common thread, but never knowing why. And then kind of learning about that diet was so eye-opening. And, you know, since then, all that research coming through about it that really helps us understand how it works and why it works and what other conditions it works for. And so, you know, definitely learning from my other fellow RDs through those kind of continuing education channels were great. I would say that I also really had to work in those early years in building up a practice. And so obviously it was very helpful to work for a gastroenterologist because there was a built-in referral base. But, you know, it's not like he ever had a dietitian working for him before. And so this idea of, you know, just like naturally, like when you see a patient with these conditions, you refer and they should all see a dietitian, and how do we do reimbursement? It was really tricky. And so I would say in those early, like in my first year, you know, there would be some days where I had 0 patients, 1 patient, if I was lucky, 2 patients. I mean, it was very slow going. And so one way that I really built up my practice was anytime I would get a patient from wherever, I would always ask them, how did you find me? And do you have a doctor that you see? Do you have a gastroenterologist? And whether or not their gastroenterologist referred them to me, which was almost always never, I would write these beautiful, elaborate, well-crafted consult notes to these doctors that didn't even refer them to me, that just were really professional and really thorough, that made these doctors realize that, like, hey, here's this fellow clinician who knows something about my patient and who has assessed my patient in a clear-headed, thoughtful way and has a plan of care. And as I would send these great notes and these patients were feeling better and eating better, the feedback would get back to their doctors, and the doctors would kind of start thinking about me. I was like, oh, next time I see a patient with that problem, there was this woman, Tamara, who really helped that last patient. And so slowly, I think that these consult notes really helped me build my practice. It took time. Obviously, it's not a fast and easy thing to do. And I think, now I have probably about a dozen gastroenterologists throughout New York City who refer patients to me regularly, and then a handful of other specialties that send me patients for other types of reasons, gestational diabetes or, high cholesterol and things like that. But, I'd say 90+% of my practice is a really digestive stuff. So we talked a little bit about sort of how I got into GI nutrition and how I built my practice and how I wrote my book. I want to maybe take you to the backstory of how I even ended up in grad school to begin with, because this is very much a second career. It's actually more like a fourth or fifth career. But out of school originally, I started as a management consultant. I worked for Boston Consulting Group in my early 20s. Huge imposter syndrome there, right? Being like a young 20-something female telling Fortune 500 companies how to run their businesses when I knew nothing about nothing. So I started working for Boston Consulting Group, worked there for a little over 2 years, and ended up working a lot in consumer and retail practices, and got hired along with a bunch of other members of Boston Consulting Group to join one of our clients. And so moved to New York, started working for the company that owns Bath & Body Works, and kind of got a job with Bath & Body Works. And I was running their spa at home category, and I was coming up with ideas for products and ingredients and developing products and managing a portfolio, like this $150 million portfolio of lotions and potions, and traveling all over the world. And it was just super glamorous and, objectively kind of a fun job, although it was a lot of hours and travel and work. I don't know, it wasn't working for me. I didn't love coming to work in the morning. I didn't feel this passion about what I was doing, even though objectively speaking, I had such a cool job. And I was getting close to turning 30. I was in my late 20s, and I was feeling like, man, with all these hours I keep, I'm eating all my meals out at a restaurant. I'm, on a plane all the time. I can barely walk up a flight of stairs without getting winded. Like, I'm going to turn 30 soon. Like, I gotta get my house in order. So, I joined a gym. I had never been much of an exerciser, and I started exercising with a trainer, because that's what you do when you have disposable income and no children. And started getting fit, started getting into health, but realizing that I knew nothing about eating and how I was supposed to eat and what was, good for me. And so I just randomly went to Barnes & Noble and bought just some random book about nutrition. And when I reflect back, I won't even mention the name, but when I reflect back at the book, I'm mortified that this is the book that kind of converted me over, because it's a book that I would never, ever, ever allow any of my patients to read or take anything out of, but there it is. And I just loved reading about nutrition and food, and, kind of be 3:00 on a Sunday, and I'd be reading about nutrition, and I'd have to put this book away and kind of open my work emails and check in and, and kind of get back into work mode for Monday morning. And I literally had this just aha moment one Sunday afternoon, which is, wait a second, what if I didn't have to put away the nutrition stuff for my real job? What if nutrition was my real job? What are the types of jobs that people do when they are nutritionists? And I kind of was Googling, and I saw that there was this thing called a dietitian, which I'd never heard of. And then I started Googling to see how you become a dietitian. And I realized in New York City, there was 3 or 4 different programs that you could be in to get your dietetics certification, like the DPD and the master's. And literally within the span of a few hours, I was applying to NYU to become, a grad student in their nutrition program. It was really kind of just this impulse, spur of the moment, just it all made sense to me, this aha moment. And that was, I guess, around 2008 summer. And I basically quit my job very soon after and went back to school full time. It took me 3 full years because I had no undergraduate science whatsoever. So I had to do the entire DPD, which took me a full year, including summers, and then started on the master's program. And so, I would say that, coming into dietetics from a career sort of marketing and business development has been a huge advantage to me, because, I think a lot of what you do in business and certainly in management consulting is kind of taking a lot of data that just is messy and chaotic, and trying to really organize it and make sense of it. A lot of pattern recognition, which, in terms of in a GI world, helping with diagnostics is hugely helpful, right? Patients have all sorts of data that they give us about, when I eat this food, I feel this way. When I eat that food, I feel that way. My symptoms are worse in the morning, they're best at night. I feel better when I poop, I feel worse when I poop. Patients give us all this data and they don't know what's relevant. Sometimes patients will tell you, I have a toenail fungus. Literally, this happened to me this week. I have a toenail fungus, and so I think I might have candida. You have to be able to sort out whether you think that the data are relevant, whether the data are noisy. And so much of this is what you learn in business, is how to work with information and classify it and categorize it and use it. And so, as a GI dietitian, I feel like all those skills I got in business were hugely helpful. And that's really what I do. I collect data. I know that, as a dietitian, it's not my job to diagnose a patient. It's huge mission creep. It's not our scope of practice. But we can be tremendous partners to doctors in the diagnostic process, because we collect and are subject to so much data that doctors don't collect. And even if they do collect the data, we're the experts. We know what to do with that data. We know when a patient tells us what they eat. We know how to make sense of that. We can look at a diet and say, is it high fiber, is it low fiber? Is it high FODMAP or low FODMAP? Is it a fatty diet, is it a low fat diet? Is it a really front-loaded diet, or are they a feast and famine, eating nothing during the day and eating everything at night? Like, we can make sense of all this data and how a patient feels in the context of their diet, and feed that back to a doctor to aid in the diagnostic process. And I think that that's it's a huge value that we bring to the world of medicine and healthcare that is underutilized by a lot of us. I think that we can really view ourselves as partners in diagnostics. And I think what I see is that a lot of our fellow dietitians and a lot of us want to be helpful. Patients come to us and they're miserable and they don't have answers and they want answers. And we feel a pressure or an obligation, or just this desire to help get them answers. And I think that what that often leads to is us overstepping sometimes and, getting involved in sort of pseudoscientific diagnostics, right? We want to be able to help. So, I heard that there's this great stool test that I can order as a dietitian, or I can order a breath test in certain states, like these mail away kits, or, I can prescribe certain supplement regimens because they're over the counter. And we kind of, out of a desire to help people and a desire to make them better and get a patient who needs a diagnosis, sometimes we can overstep and do, I think, more harm than good. One thing that I do see a lot of is patients who come to me having come from a world of sort of less evidence-based practice, whether it's from, our world in nutrition, or whether it's from sort of other types of modalities that are not practicing evidence-based care. And they're so confused. They think they have this diagnosis or that diagnosis. And there's so much baggage from that it really can eat into our ability to kind of start with a fresh, clean slate and look at everything from scratch and, make an assessment based on the facts on the ground. How do I feel when I eat this, without being colored by, maybe I have leaky gut, or maybe I have candida, or maybe I have adrenal fatigue. Some of these circulating diagnoses can really color how a patient tells their story and the narrative that they have about what they tolerate and what they don't tolerate, what's inflammatory and what's not inflammatory. And I think the more that we can just look at the facts, look at the data, look at what a patient's eating and how they're feeling, help them make sense of that without too much dogma, without too much of our own philosophies and dogma about, what people or humans should be eating or shouldn't be eating. I think we can really help them drive to solutions. We don't need them to have a medical diagnosis to be able to help our patients. We can listen to them and listen to their symptoms and listen to how their symptoms are affected by their food to help them feel better, even if we can't explain why they feel bad. And I think that it's okay to tell a patient, like, I'm not sure why you feel this way, you have the diarrhea, but I think I can still help you feel better. And if you respond to this diet or that diet, then let's talk to your doctor about maybe chasing down a test for one of these two diagnoses. And so I think that that's really an amazing value that we can add as dietitians to help our patients in a very evidence-based way. And so what was I going with that? And so, yeah, I think combating some of the misinformation, some of the dogma, I think it's so important for us not to kind of come in with our patients with a point of view that there's one right way for everybody to be eating, that not everyone has to be vegan or low carb or gluten-free, dairy-free or keto, that there are a lot of versions of a healthy diet, and maybe how we eat is not how our patients need to eat, or maybe how that healthy patient eats is going to be very different from the way that healthy patient eats. Salads are objectively healthy, but they don't always feel good for everyone, and so if they don't feel good, our patients should not feel obligated to eat salads if they don't tolerate them. And so, really, I think viewing our role as helping our patients eat the healthiest diet that they can comfortably tolerate, and helping our patients come to accept that that might look different than their coworker or their sister's diet or their trainer's diet. And to accept that if raw vegetables don't work for them, then they shouldn't eat them, that they're not under any obligation to eat kale, that it's not a moral indictment if you don't tolerate kale and you can't eat kale. And if you can tolerate beans and legumes, then those are objectively healthy things to eat. They're not inflammatory. They're actually the opposite. And so if there are healthy foods that they can eat, that there's no reason to restrict them, and to just help our patients find a way to navigate all the noise out there, all the dogmatism and all the fads, and just to have them focus inward on themselves and, and what's a healthy diet for them and what diet feels good in their body, and just to forget what someone else is eating and what other people are eating, and to stop the comparisons on social media or in our own social circles, and just recognizing that there's so many different paths to good health. I guess so that's my soapbox. I know that we have a couple minutes left, so I'm just going to restate who I am in case you weren't here in the very beginning. I'm Tamara Duker Freuman. I am the Bloated Belly Whisperer, and that's where you can find me online, www.thebloatedbellywhisperer.com. You can find me on Twitter at Tamara Duker, Duker, and you can find me on Facebook and Instagram at Bloated Belly Whisperer. And, if anybody has other questions, I see that a bunch of comments have come in. Let's see, a lot of people excited about my journey, scope of practice, relieving. Okay, everyone's just loving me right now. You're just pouring your love on me. I don't see any questions. But, thank you so much for, I know so many of you have reached out to me and have bought my book and, send me questions and about articles I've written. And I think that that's super gratifying for me. I have to say that when I wrote my book, it was like kind of half for patients, but also half for our fellow RDs. It kind of felt like I wanted to write the textbook that I never had in grad school about sort of managing digestive symptoms and figuring out digestive disorders, because I had to learn all of that on the job as I went. And so I really did write the Bloated Belly Whisper as a little bit of like a, for my fellow RDs as a practice guide, but also for patients who don't have access to expert gastroenterologists, wherever they're living, to be able to kind of self-navigate a little bit and be better advocates for their own care. And so that's definitely part of the reason I wrote the book. And so I hope that it's helped you. I've heard from so many of my fellow dietitians that it has been helpful, and that to me that's like hugely gratifying, because I think that the more of us evidence-based practitioners who are kind of out there building our platform, speaking truth, and really helping patients get good results with evidence-based interventions, I think that's our best way of combating a lot of the pseudoscience and, a lot of the nonsense that is costing our patients a lot of time, a lot of money, a lot of confusion, a lot of useless supplements. And so I think that the more that we can just be out there helping people with evidence-based practice, the stronger we're going to be able to kind of combat a lot of the noisy stuff coming from people who maybe don't have expertise in training. And so somebody asked where you can buy the book. You can get it online. I would normally say Amazon, but in these times, let's support our local independent booksellers. And so if you have a local bookseller that's still shipping things online, it's published by St. Martin's Press, so it's very widely distributed. It's now available in paperback, pretty easy to find online. And so definitely support your local independent bookstores. And if you have any questions about anything I've said before and want to shoot me a note, send me an email through my website, DM me through any of my social channels. And I'm so just super glad that I was able to make this Facebook Live work, because I'm a complete technological Luddite. I know nothing about technology, and I'm just really excited that I made this work and that you can all hear me and see me. So thank you so much for joining me. I know that we're all Zoomed out and video chatted out, having been stuck at home for so long, but I'm so grateful that you guys are here. And I see one of my friends, Diana in Luxembourg, has joined us. So hey, Europe, good to see you. Hope you're all healthy and well. Take good care of yourselves and be in touch if you need me. Okay, take care. Bye, friends.